Okay, hi class. This is Chelsea Robinson, and I will be doing chapter 6 in our American education text on student diversity. And my presentation objective, what I really want to be talking about mostly, is the various aspects of student diversity to educate others, you all, on the important issues that students, educators, and administrators are actually dealing with on a daily basis. The basics of what we will be discussing today, or I will be discussing, would be global migration. I'm going to be talking about the history of cultural and language conflicts in our three different subgroups, which would be Mexican American, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. I will also be talking about the 1965 Immigration Act. I will be discussing educational experiences of immigrants in the United States schools and also language issues in our U.S. schools. Okay, so I would like to start out with global migration. And we have an increase in migration mostly due to the ease of travel nowadays. Families are moving about searching for better economic and political conditions for their families. We have transnational families in the U.S. who travel back and forth between host country and countries of their origin. Now, some of these transnational students actually remain bilingual. They're in our text, they discuss a little girl with aunts and uncles that are actually still in India, whose parents dream of eventually finding her a husband from there. Also, our text describes a Mexican student whose family frequently takes him back to Mexico to visit cousins, family members. I know on a personal basis, there are students in my classroom who travel back and forth to Mexico to visit family members. Illegal immigration, and that's a really big deal. Global population movement is restricted by each country and their immigration laws. Countries have a shadow population of students whose parents worry that if they send their children to school, authorities might be alerted of their illegal status and take them back to where they're actually from. So a lot of parents really have a lot of anxiety about sending their children to American schools. However, many feel it's worth the risk. We, in our text, have talked about people from Africa risking their lives to cross the Mediterranean Sea to illegally enter Spain. Thousands of countries face dangerous temperatures and things, and people will illegally enter the United States from other countries. Okay, next I want to talk about the U.S. Immigration Act of 1924, and anti-immigration feelings were inflamed in the 1890s rather, with the arrival of all of the populations from Southern and Eastern Europe. We had a large amount of immigrants coming in during that time, and many Americans just objected to this. They felt that they would be losing jobs, be losing profits and money, because others would be taking their jobs away from them. This resulted in the U.S. Immigration Act of 1924 that was established basically as a quota. And what that did was it set a limit on, depending on what your national origin was, how many people we would let come into the United States daily, yearly, in that matter. The quota was determined by the percentage of the total population in the 1920s, and composed with each national group in mind. Okay, so there were some changes caused, and in 1965 we had another Immigration Act. Because immigration had declined from the late 1920s through the early 1950s, we decided to change, and there was no longer a quota. There was another increase in the 1950s of immigration, and because of the 1965 Act, we've seen much more of an increase, actually, especially from Asia. We also actually seen a decrease of European immigrants during this time. So you're probably thinking to yourself, what does this mean for education? What does this mean to me? Well, in our text, it discusses that U.S. schools had to respond in some way to the non European cultures that were increasing in our country. There was a large emphasis on deculturalization. What that basically is, or does, is replaces non American cultures with an American culture and replaces the student's language, which would be whatever their home language was, with English. So if they predominantly speak Spanish, it would replace it with English, and it would also replace its cultures with American cultures. The first subgroup I would like to concentrate on would be Mexican American students. Public schools were not what you would call a safe haven for these students. Because of the Spanish American War and other influences, they were classified as an inferior race. In 1848, there was a treaty, and it granted U.S. citizenship to former Mexican citizens who lived in areas where the U.S. had conquered. So he gave them citizenship. However, their citizenship had limitations, and what that did was basically it segregated them in public and in their schooling, and this led to racial classification. And there was a lot of controversy around this. In 1897, Texas courts ruled that Mexican Americans were not white. In 1930, California's attorney categorized them as Indians even. And there was a lot of debate about what they would be classified as. So eventually, this led to a lot of turmoil. So they wanted to replace Spanish with English, and there was two very important laws passed during this time. The first one being in 1856, the law was passed that required the teaching of English as a subject, which you can imagine would be quite frustrating if you only spoke Spanish. In 1870, Texas legislature passed a school law that required English to be the language of instruction in all public schools. So not only would all instruction be given in English, but you would also have it as a subject. So this would be extremely frustrating for those who do not speak English. So Mexican American parents and guardians did not just sit around and take what they were dishing out, basically.